In this lesson, we're going to talk about food, soil, and pest management. And we talk about food because this is one of the primary things that, as people, we do that impacts the environment, is that we grow food for our growing population. So we're going to talk a little bit about our current methods, what our methods were in the past, and then what we can do to make our methods a little bit more sustainable. So some of the things that we've done to food is to change the food that already existed, to change plants and animals, things like that, in order to better serve us. And so one of the case studies that you're reading about is golden rice. And you're going to read about how we've added some things to the rice in order to make it more beneficial to the human population. So one of the things that we will talk about in this particular chapter is about genetically modified foods. And so you'll get the opportunity to kind of explore what that means and then what you think about that. So right now, the hard part about food is that not everyone has what we call food security. And food security means that I know where my next meal comes from. And not everyone in the world has that security like many of us do in the United States, where, this isn't just the I miss lunch, I'm hungry. This is there's nothing for anyone to eat kind of a thing. And so in most developing nations, you have the majority of populations do not have good food security. They can't meet their basic energy needs, or they can't meet their nutritional needs. So there's I don't have enough, which is undernutrition of anything. Like, I don't have enough calories in order to support my day. And then the malnutrition is where mal means bad, right? That prefix means bad. And so this is bad nutrition. This is where I might be full, but I might not have all the nutrients that I need. So I might be missing vitamin A or vitamin C or vitamin D, or one of those essential key nutrients that I need in order to be able to have my body function properly. So once again, we come back to poverty. You're going to find that a lot of the environmental issues that we're going to talk about, the root cause of them, 9 times out of 10, is poverty. And so that root cause for this is the same thing. So, and that lack of food security. Poverty can have many different causes and many different reasons for it being there. But in general, I think we all know that that means that things aren't going very well in areas where there's high levels of poverty. So in this picture, which is, I know, a little bit disturbing, which she has what's called a goiter, because she's lacking some essential nutrients. So malnutrition doesn't necessarily mean that you're really skinny. A lot of times, actually, in the pictures that you see of people who are malnourished, or even ones that are undernourished, they tend to have a very large pot belly, and a lot of that's because there's a lot of gases in the stomach that kind of cause bloat, and then you can have other issues, and this is one. You can have, there's blindness, there's a number of issues that can occur because of undernutrition and malnutrition. When we look at how can we help and what can we do about this, one thing is to immunize children. I know it sounds like, what does that have to do with food? But when you immunize, you strengthen the immune system, and it increases their ability to fight off infection, which, if you're already malnourished, that makes it harder. If you're malnourished or undernourished, it's really hard to fight off infection. And so strengthening their immune system is very helpful. With breastfeeding, if any of the mother will pass along any kind of immunity that she has to illness will get passed along through the breast milk. And so for infants, it provides immunity through the mother. We want to prevent dehydration from diarrhea. We talked a little bit about this in the hazards in human health, that people can actually die from diarrhea. And I know that doesn't sound like something that is a problem with us, because if you don't feel good like that, you take some Pepto-Bismol or something like that, some Imodium, and you're fine. But in areas where they don't have access to that kind of medication, it can be deadly. We want to be able to prevent blindness, so that's one thing that the golden rice that you're reading about will help with. But a lot of it's just making sure that people have access to a balanced diet will help with that. And then anytime that we raise the level of education for women, and we raise the status of women in countries, we tend to have fewer childhood illnesses and deaths. Um, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So where do we get food from? So we get food from a number of different sources. So croplands are things like if you think about flying over the Midwest, and you see the acres and acres of corn, that would be considered croplands. Rangelands are places where we graze cattle and sheep primarily. And then our two ways that we get water, that we get um, sustenance from water would be from ocean fisheries, which would be like the deep sea fishing, that kind of fisheries, and then from aquaculture, which is kind of like farming in water. So our cereal grains, which are wheat, rice, and corn, produce about half of the world's consumed calories, and a great deal of that actually comes from the Midwestern United States, even for other countries. In some countries where we have very small countries that are island nations or that have a large amount of coastline, that's where we see that the ocean fisheries are very important. In order to be able to produce the amount of food that we do, we had to kind of change the way that we grew crops. And one of those things that we changed to was the high input monoculture. So mono means one, and a culture is the strain or the variety of crop that we're growing. And so a monoculture means that you're growing one thing. So you're growing like all corn, or you're growing all wheat, or you're growing all one thing in one big area. So in order to do that, we use a lot of fossil fuels. The fossil fuels get used in the farm machinery, actually in generating pesticides, in generating the fertilizers and things like that. All of that requires a lot of fossil fuels in order to do and to utilize. We use the greenhouses so that we can grow things out of season, so that you can have tomatoes year round, so that you can have different kinds of fruits and vegetables out of season. We use the greenhouses for them. And in some areas of the world, especially when we talk about the plantations in the tropics, we're talking about in the developing nations where they're trying to export something. They try to export whatever they can in order to increase their gross domestic product or to make more money for their countries. And so they're using plantations. So this is where, when in Environmental 1, when you were talking about biodiversity and the reduction of the rainforest, a lot of that, the purpose for reducing the rainforest was for the wood and the money that they could get from the wood, but it was also to clear land so that they could grow things. When we look around the world, industrialized agriculture is in green, so that's the high throughput or the high input monocultures. It's what we refer to as industrialized agriculture. The yellow is where they're shifting from a more traditional form of agriculture to that industrialized agriculture. And then the orange is where you're seeing where it's not. This is the nomadic herding is like the people that follow the animals around. So they're either following around things like yak or cattle or something like that, where they're moving things around. It just kind of depends. If you look at areas where it's at, so up in here, they're larger beasts like yak. They're following around. They might be herding camels or goats or sheep. Okay, in the Middle East and in Africa. Up in here, you're going to see some of the native peoples following caribou herds and things like that. So we also produce not only cereal crops through the industrial agriculture, we applied a lot of those principles to raising livestock. And so most of our cattle actually are not raised on open ranges anymore. They're grown in feedlots or they're raised in feedlots. And if you drive to California along the southern route going towards San Diego, you'll pass actually 2 or 3 feedlots on your way, and you can usually smell them before you can see them because they're just these large areas where there's a lot of manure that's produced because there's so many cows in a particular area. They use it because they can raise more animals in a smaller area, and they don't have to chase them around or anything like that on the open range. There are some definite downsides to using feedlots. when we look at the amount of waste that is produced in the southern part of the United States, one of the things that they raise in the feedlots are pigs, and then they have these big ponds. That's where they put the pig excrement, and then they're evaporation ponds, so they let the liquid portion of it evaporate out, and then they sell the solids, and they use the solids for fertilizer. So they compost them down, and then they can sell them as fertilizer. The problem with that is that in many areas in the southeast, the water table is very high, and there's the area is not very high above like the river levels and things like that. And so when they put them too close to rivers and there's floods or there's hurricanes or something like that, it can flood out these sedimentation ponds, and then it can contaminate their water supply. And so they have to be very careful about where they place the feedlots and how they dispose of the waste for those.